Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture series on Indian polity. In the previous lecture, we have completed the introduction to Indian polity, where we have delved into our approach towards Indian polity from the preliminary point of view and from the mains point of view. Right? Through the examples such as fundamental rights, Parliament, and the Election Commission of India, we have dealt in a detailed manner about our approach from prelims and from mains. This is lecture B. Here we are going to categorize the Indian polity syllabus into three different volumes: volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3. So this categorization is basically meant for better understanding of the syllabus, right? So lecture B, introduction to volume 1. So as I have already maintained, Indian polity subject in our lecture series divided into three different volumes: volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3, right? Now we are going to look into what are the aspects or what are the contents of these three different volumes. Right, here volume 1. So volume 1 will cover from Regulating Act of 1773 till Article 51A. That means fundamental duties enshrined in Part 4A. That means volume 1 will deal all the concepts, right? All the discussion will be covering from Regulating Act of 1773, the first British legislation in relation to India, right? So the British Parliament has interfered into the internal affairs of the East India Company through the Regulating Act. From 1600, the year of inception of East India Company, till 1773, there was no interference from the British Parliament into the affairs of the East India Company. It was only looked after the profit motive of the company, right? So it did not enter into how the things are going on in India. It did not look into that aspect, right? So only in 1773, a particular legislation was brought in the name of Regulating Act of 1773. So from that concept till Article 51A, that means the fundamental duties which are enshrined in Part 4A of the Indian Constitution. So all the discussions encompassing in between these two concepts will cover under volume 1. In this present lecture, that is lecture B, introduction to volume 1, we are going to cover what are the units that will be covered under volume 1. Volume 1 is covered under 9 units and 35 chapters. So a little while from now, we are going to see what are these 9 units. At present, we are going to look into what is volume 2 and what are the contents of volume 2 and what are the contents of volume 3 briefly. So volume 2 will cover, this volume 2 will cover, just a minute. Yes, this volume 2 will cover concepts such as federalism, unitary systems of government. So concepts such as federalism, unitary type of government, 3 types of government, such as central level, state level, and local governments, and also center-state relations, interstate relations, right? Emergency provisions. All these will come under volume 2, and we are going to look into in a broader view volume 1 a bit later. Okay. The 6th concept will be Indian judiciary, which will cover Supreme Court, High Courts, subordinate judiciary, right? And judicial activism, judicial activism, concepts such as judicial activism, judicial restraint, judicial activism, judicial restraint, judicial review, judicial accountability, judicial independence. All this is covered under a different unit. Okay, right. So again, there are two other topics which will cover under Indian judiciary only. They are family courts, and gram nyayalayas. Gram nyayalayas. All these concepts will form part and parcel of volume 2. So after completing the whole volume 1, we will come to volume 2, and at that time we will discuss what are the units of volume 2. As a separate introduction to volume 2 video, we will cover that. Okay, briefly and in a crisp manner, we are going to see what is volume 2 and what actually it contains. In a similar manner, we are also going to look into volume 3 and what does it contain. So here, volume 3 will cover constitutional bodies. So here, constitutional bodies such as Election Commission, Finance Commission, UPSC, SPSC, right, COG, etc. So all these bodies which are constituted under the provisions of the Constitution will be covered under constitutional bodies unit under volume 3. Okay. Then non-constitutional bodies. These non-constitutional bodies will be of two types. So one is constitutional bodies. That means they are constituted under the provisions of the Constitution. Non-constitutional bodies means their constitution or their inception is nowhere related to the Constitution. So they are outside the part of the Constitution. But here also they are of two categories, that is statutory bodies, non-statutory bodies. The difference being is statutory bodies form under particular legislation of the Parliament. So Parliament brings a legislation under the provisions of such particular legislation. If a body is formed, that is called a statutory body. If there is no legislative enactment for the creation of a body, still it is created, then it is called as non-statutory body. Examples of statutory bodies being NHRC, SHRC, CVC, right, CIC, Central Information Commission, State Information Commission. These two are formed under RTI, right? NHRC, HSRC are formed at National Human Rights Act. So non-statutory bodies mean Niti Aayog, erstwhile, I mean, it is not existent today, but we have to know the concept of Planning Commission also. So the Planning Commission also non-statutory body. Okay. So first one, second one. Then other topics such as elections in India. Here we are going to discuss concepts such as model code of conduct. Whether, I mean, in recent times there is a discussion that model code of conduct is an executive mechanism. There is no legal standing for that. That means there is no legal backing. So no such act provides backing for the model code of conduct. So there is some discussion is there whether model code of conduct be granted legal status, right? MCC, model code of conduct. So EVMs, VVPATs, right? Swap elections, right? Simultaneous elections, electoral bond scheme. Though the Supreme Court has nullified the scheme of electoral bonds, still it is relevant that what are the loopholes that found by the Supreme Court and nullified the electoral bond scheme. So we are going to look into electoral bond scheme, and there we are going to propose some measures in bringing transparency in electoral funding. Right, the Law Commission and various other committees have recommended certain measures which will bring transparency in electoral funding. So we are going to look into that. Having known either about 5 to 6 points about transparency in electoral funding will fetch you good marks in your answer writing, right? Likewise, pressure groups. So what are pressure groups and what is their role in policy making, in the governance? We are going to look into that. Similarly, coalition politics. Coalition politics. So nowadays it is a bit and it is part and parcel of our democracy, in Indian democracy. So the formation of coalition governments and what are the pros and cons of coalition governments, we are going to look into that, right? So in effect, Indian polity subject is being divided into 3 different volumes: volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3. We have seen in a brief manner what volume 1 contains, what volume 2 contains, and what volume 3 contains. Now we are going to look into, in a detailed manner, what are the units that were parcel of, that were part of volume 1. So as I already maintained, volume 1 is going to cover under 9 units and 35 chapters. 9 units and 35 chapters. Now we are going to look into these 9 units. And for every unit there will be an introduction. So our scheme of explanation will be, so there will be an introduction for volume 1. There will be an introduction to each of these 9 units. Whenever we start a new unit, we are going to have introduction, unit 1, unit 2. So what happens here means, whenever you are having an introduction for a particular unit or for a particular volume, so it will make you understand that what you are going to learn in that particular sphere of explanation or in that particular sphere of lecture series. So this will fetch something like, we are going to learn this thing. So a preconception in your mind will make the things understand better way, right? So here the volume 1 is going to cover under 9 units. Under volume 1, the unit 1 is titled as pre-constitutional, just a minute, pre-constitutional legal framework in India. So here decode the unit name. Pre-constitutional. Pre means it is before to the enactment or the commencement of the constitution. So whatever the legal framework is there before, pre-constitution, before the enactment of the constitution, whatever the legal framework is there in India, we are going to learn about that. We are going to deal about that under unit 1. So here all the things that cover from Regulating Act of, starting with Regulating Act of 1773. Legal framework means all the enactments which were brought by the British Parliament in relation to India will be discussed under unit 1. That is before the commencement of the constitution. Constitution was framed by independent India, but before the grant of independence to India and Pakistan, there is a legal framework that is set by the British Parliament. So we are going to look into that, right? So starting with Regulating Act of 1773. Next, Charter Acts of 1793, 1813, 1833, 1853. There comes Government of India Act of 1858, right? Government of India Act 1858. Also, Indian Councils Acts of 1861, 1892, and 1909. Also, Government of India Act of 1919, 1935, and ending with Indian Independence Act of 1947. And we are going to cover in a detailed analytical manner. Many of the texts or many of the sources will not get into the details of the analytical part of this section, but it is very important to understand why a particular legislation was brought in. So anyway, the reason-based analysis or reason-based discussion will bring more clarity towards the subject, and that will there in a perpetual basis in your mind. Okay. So unit 1, pre-constitutional legal framework in India. There we are going to discuss all the British legislations which were brought in relation to India, starting with Regulating Act of 1773, ending with Indian Independence Act of 1947. So night here, volume 2, Indian Constitution, its making, amendment, and basic structure doctrine. So under unit 2, we are going to cover 3 different topics. That means how the Indian Constitution was made, how the Indian Constitution was brought into force. So it's making amendment. What is the amendment process of Indian Constitution, right? And basic structure doctrine, how the basic structure doctrine was evolved from the judicial pronouncement, right? So we are going to see the saga of all the judgments which related to the evolution of the basic structure doctrine. There is a tussle between, I mean, in the introduction lecture we have discussed that there is a tussle between Supreme Court and the Parliament in defending, I mean, Supreme Court tries to defend the fundamental rights, and the Parliament or the legislature, it tries to defend or it tries to implement the DPSPs. So in the tussle, in the case of the Bharati case, basic structure doctrine was evolved. So we are going to look into the process of evolution of basic structure doctrine under Unit 2, right? Unit 3. Unit 3, sources and salient features of the Indian Constitution. So in this Unit 3, we are going to cover two different topics. One is the sources. This is foreign sources. Indian Constitution was an inspired constitution from many of the constitutions that were existed at the time across the world. Okay, so it is being criticized that Indian Constitution is a borrowed constitution. So whenever you are writing in your mains answer writing, do not mention borrowed. Indian Constitution is a borrowed constitution. No, you should not mention like that. Indian Constitution is an inspired constitution. So India got inspired from the various aspects or the various provisions of the constitutions that were available across the world during that time. But however, those provisions, I mean, those provisions or those principles were made applicable to India. So they were made applicable to India because India is a geographically vast country, culturally diversity. So to make all those provisions, the drafters of the constitutions strenuously they applied the Indian conditions to the provisions which were available in the other constitutions. So we are going to see all those aspects in the sources of the Indian Constitution. Likewise, salient features of the Indian Constitution. Indian Constitution, being the lengthiest constitution of the world, is accorded with several salient features. We are going to look into that. And here, one thing you have to remember: Indian Constitution is being criticized as the lengthiest constitution of the world. Here we have to defend like that. Here we have to, I mean, in our discussion also, we are going to have around 30 to 40 minutes about that, how we are going to defend that. So Indian Constitution, for a geographically diverse country as India, the constitution must be, we are having Schedule 5, Schedule 6, right? So the administration of duties, the administration of Article 371, right? So geographically different states, they have different administrative setups, and every administrative detail is being incorporated into Indian Constitution. Schedule 5 areas have a different setup of administration. Likewise, Schedule 6 areas also have just a minute. Likewise, Schedule 6 areas also having different kind of administrative setup. And the details of all these, they were not brought as a parliamentary enactment. They were included in the Constitution itself. Special provisions to several states, which were included under Article 371, they are also being part and parcel of the Constitution. So having encompassed all these details in a detailed manner will make the Constitution anyway a lengthiest one. And we are going to discuss all these things, how to defend such kind of criticisms about the Indian Constitution. They were included in the lecture itself. Right. Unit 4, the preamble. Here we are going to discuss the preamble, about the preamble and the keywords involved in it, such as secularism, socialism, I mean secular, socialist, sovereignty, integrity, justice. So all these kind of keywords will be dealt in a detailed manner with certain examples from the Indian perspective. So the preamble chapter, I mean the unit, will be dealt in a detailed manner, and I have given a separate unit for it because all these terms have some weight, have some meaning for it. Secularism will be dealt, and we are going to cover some examples or illustrations. Those can be directly incorporated in your answer writing, right? So likewise, all these terms will be dealt in a detailed manner with examples from the Indian perspective. Right. Unit 5, Indian Union and its varied territories. Indian Union and its varied territories. Here we are going to cover Articles 1 to 4. Articles 1 to 4, right? And the reorganization of Indian states from 1950 till the abrogation of Article 370. That means making Jammu and Kashmir as two, the state of Jammu and Kashmir as two different union territories in the year 2019, and also in 2020 there is a amalgamation of two UTs into single UT, two union territories into a single one. Dadra Nagar Haveli and Daman Diu. They were two different union territories, and in 2020, for administrative convenience, they were merged into one union territory, right? So we are going to cover from the starting of 1950 how states were there. In what way? At the time there were four parts: Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D. Part A states, Part B states, Part C states, and Part D states. And in 1956, this part type of classification was dismantled, and in 1956, a kind of recognition was given to linguistic basis states. From there also, there were several demands. In 1960, there was a division, 1972 division. So likewise, historically, how the states were created. It is a what we call potential question for Indian polity from the preliminary point of view, right? So we are going to cover all these things in our discussion in Unit 5. Unit 6, here, citizenship, rights and legal framework. Rights and legal framework. Under the rights, we are going to cover Articles 5 to 11. Here, one thing I have to mention, Indian citizenship. Citizenship in India having two bases. One is constitutional basis. Constitutional basis. And the other one is legal basis. That means they are not different actually. Just have a second here. Constitutional basis means Articles 5 to 11. Article 5 to 11 will deal with Indian citizenship at the time of partition. So at the time of partition, who were accorded with the Indian citizenship will be discussed as part of the constitutional basis. And the constitution itself grants the parliament to deal with the Indian citizenship for the future course of time. That means at the constitution framing time, whoever will be accorded with the citizenship will be dealt from Article 5 to 11. So at that time, in 1947, when the partition was made, so during that time, who will be awarded citizenship and who will be left behind the Indian citizenship will be dealt with from Articles 5 to 11. Okay. So in these articles also, in these articles itself, there is a provision that for future course of time, the Constitution of India will grant the parliament to enact a legislation, to bring out a legislation in the form of, so the parliament has brought Citizenship Act of 1955. Citizenship Act of 1955, and this particular legislation has amended several times to bring in changes in the citizenship norms and rules. Okay, so citizenship in India has granted constitutionally to all those who were part and parcel of Indian landmass at the time of the partition, and those provisions are incorporated in Article 5 to 11. As part of these provisions, a special provision was made which dealt with future course of time, for future periods. So every time amending the constitution for citizenship rules and norms is not appropriate, and that power has to be rested with the parliament, the state, the union, the India's legislature, right? So the power of framing the rules, right, bringing about the changes of citizenship have to be rested with Indian Parliament. So the Constitution has accorded the power to the Indian Parliament to make rules and regulations in relation to the Indian citizenship. So in accordance with that, Citizenship Act of 1955 was brought by the Indian Parliament, and which was amended several times to bring in changes. We are going to see all those changes, and here also we are going to concern with CAA 2019. Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. We are going to discuss in a detailed manner its pros, cons, and we are going to draw a middle ground. Draw a middle ground. This middle ground is very important for our mains answer writing. And also NRC, National Register of Citizens, which is an exercise held in Assam. We are going to cover that also. And also, what are who are NRIs, OCI cards, persons of Indian origin. So all these concepts will be covered under citizenship chapter. Citizenship unit. Okay. In a detailed manner, we are going to cover all these things. Right. Unit 7, an in-depth exploration. An in-depth. That means an in-depth exploration of the fundamental rights. So why I actually stress this in-depth? So we are going to, in the lecture 1 also, lecture A also, we have seen the fundamental topic. From the mains perspective, we have dealt into the expansion of fundamental rights. In the expansion of fundamental rights, we are going to cover Article 14, Article 15, Article 16, Article 17, Article 19, and Article 21. These 6 fundamental rights will be dealt really in a detailed manner. You might have not seen this type of discussion anywhere else. Right? So here we are going to cover all the cases, Supreme Court cases. Right? Repeatedly we will mention in the class itself, so there will be no difficulty for remembering them. Exploration, in-depth exploration of the fundamental rights. So where we are going to cover in the core syllabus, we are going to cover all the articles from 12 to 35, which were enshrined in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, right? Apart from that, from the mains perspective, we are going to cover expansion of these 6 fundamental rights. Expansion of, and also we are going to cover balance of power. Balance of power. That means how fundamental rights got in conflict with DPSPs. So all these things will be covered in a detailed manner. Okay. So here the unit 8 title is Guiding Governance. Guiding Governance, DPSPs. Directive Principles of State Policy. Directive Principles. Directive. That means it is giving some direction. It is giving some direction to whom? State. State's policy. Directive Principles of State Policy. That means directive principles. These are the principles which give direction. Which give direction to whom? To the state policy. To the state policy. That means whenever the Indian government, Indian Parliament or the Indian government bringing about a policy, or the state government bringing about a policy, it has to keep in mind. It has to keep in mind the DPSPs. It has to serve. It has to bring justice to the DPSPs in their policy making, in their law making. Okay, in their programs and schemes. So it is titled as Guiding Governance. Guiding Governance. Here we are going to cover something like, we are going to discuss about Article 36 to 51. In any way, we are going to cover this as a core part. In addition to this, just a minute. In addition to this, we are going to cover something new. We are going to link. We are going to link Indian government schemes. Indian government schemes with the DPSPs. DPSPs. Likewise, for example, free legal aid. Yesterday also we have seen this. Free legal aid, which was provided through NALSA. Okay, which was provided through NALSA. So it is that reflection of Article 39A. Article 39A. So wherever it is possible, for each article of the directive principle, we are going to bring the Indian government schemes. For example, MTP Act, Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. Sorry, it is not the case. Maternity Benefit Act. Maternity Benefit Act, which was brought by the Indian government. So it is that reflection of one of the DPSPs. One of the DPSPs. So old age assistance. Old age assistance was covered under different schemes of the Indian government. So that is a reflection of a particular DPSP. So we are going to cover in a detailed manner for each DPSP what are the schemes. At least 3 schemes we are going to cover. At least 3 schemes which are part and parcel of that particular DPSP. For example, if you say Article 41, so under this we are going to cover at least 3 schemes of the Indian government, so that those schemes those schemes can be directly reflected in your answer writing. right? Whenever there is a DPSP related question, just mentioning Article 41A and the contents of Article 41A may not fetch you good marks. If you link that Article 41 with your present day schemes and programs of the Indian government, that will make the examiner think that the candidate or the aspirant having a broad knowledge, a broader view of the Indian polity subject. Okay, right. Next, Unit 9, exploring the essence of fundamental duties. Exploring the essence of fundamental duties. Right here, fundamental duties, they were enshrined in Part 4A under Article 51A, where we are having 11 fundamental duties. Similarly, in the case of DPSPs, how we are actually connected the DPSP with a particular type of scheme of the government of India. Here also we are going to give certain examples related to that particular fundamental duty, which will make better understanding of the subject, and you can easily recall the illustration or the example in your mains answer writing. I mean, merely, what we call just memorizing these fundamental duties will may be useful for the preliminary point of view, but for the mains point of view, you have to link that to a particular concept in your real time, to a particular program, to a particular scheme in the real time. So we are going to do that, right? Okay. So we have done with the lecture B, which is an introduction to volume 1. So far we have completed 2 lectures. Lecture A, where we have discussed about our approach towards Indian polity subject. Lecture B, we have completed introduction to volume 1. So this volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, I have already said, it is the categorization which was made according to my understanding of the subject. So I feel like this categorization will make help to the aspirant community. So we have completed volume 1 introduction. In the next lecture, we have, lecture C, we will be looking at the introduction to unit 1. So lecture A, lecture B, lecture C will be a kind of introductions. In next lecture, lecture C, introduction to unit 1, where we are going to delve into the chapters that unit 1 contain. So today we have seen the units that volume 1 contained. We have discussed that. In the next lecture, we are going to see the chapters that unit 1 will contain, right? Thank you. Have a great day.